Okay, sorry.
All right, so we're recording. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Associate Editors Who Read
Hello.
Slush Summit and panel. I'm so glad that you all are here. This is a great turnout, especially for early in the morning if anybody's on the West Coast. So my name is Elizabeth Hurst. I've got to change my screen name. Um, and I will be your moderator for today. We will be taking Q&A in the chat session. So if you'd like to just put any questions you have for us in there. So I'll start by introducing myself. I am a novelist and short story writer. I have a book, The Face in the Marsh, out with Renaissance Press, and another forthcoming book, This is Early Warning, for Renaissance Press as well. And this weekend I'm going to be reading from my story that's in the Quiet Afternoon anthology. So let's just go around the panel and check in with everyone else and see what they're up to. So let's start with Rebecca.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Inch Partridge. I'm a freelance editor that specializes in science fiction, and I've been doing Slush for quite a while. I'm one of those weird people who absolutely loves it, so I was glad we're having this panel. I'm sure we'll have a little bit of a bitch session, like people who don't follow guidelines, but other than that, I just want to talk about how great it is.
I love that. All right, Jeannie?
Hi, my name's JF Gerard, Jeannie Gerard. I do a bunch of stuff. I have an indie press called Dark Helix Press. I'm the deputy editor for Rice Paper magazine, and I also do slush reading for Amazing Stories. Oh yes, and I do stuff for Canadian Authors Association as their co-president. So I do a lot of volunteer work generally. But I'm glad to be part of this panel. I mean, Amazing Stories has been around for quite a while, so the restart was very exciting, and to have an opportunity to go through the slush pile was really good to see what sort of stories are out there, what kind of things people are sending in. So that was very good.
So I think I know where I'd like to start then. I don't know, when Ira told me about this gig, I was just over the moon. When I was going through university, because I actually studied popular narrative in university as my area of specialty, so Amazing Stories was like huge, and I was just so excited to be a part of the continuing discourse, and to be able to contribute to that. But yeah, I want to talk about like what we love the most about reading the first submissions from people. And I would say for me, it's that I get to read so many incredible stories that just like I keep thinking about for days afterwards, even if they're not right for the magazine. It's just a pleasure to get to see what people are thinking and writing and putting out there in the world. So yeah, and of course it's really exciting to find that gem that is going to be amazing for the magazine too. So I'm going to shake things up and go back over to Jeannie and see what you think.
Well, I mean, at the slush pile, it's really the opportunity to sort of pick out the stories that you think the readers would want and what resonates right now. And I think it's also very interesting that most of us are female. So I think that's probably quite different, perhaps, in the past for a lot of science fiction magazines, especially. So we have a different outlook on things, and when we pick out stories, like obviously, there's multiple decisions that go into it. It's not just one person that will pick out a story and say, okay, this is it, right? So a lot of us sometimes will interact each other. There's things that we write notes for the stories and we compare them, and eventually we narrow it down. But going through the slush pile is very interesting because it's where the raw material is, right? Like this is like compared to what gets published, it's very, very different. Like what comes in is not what the final product will be, and then it takes a lot of work to polish up that story and to get it out the door. So it's quite a process, and for some writers that's already been published, you would have gone through this process with editors. But for new writers, like they might not, or readers, they might not necessarily see the process and how long it takes to get something out the door. So
Yeah, it is like a treasure hunt.
Yes.
You feel like you're trying to find something in this stack, and I mean physically when I'm looking at my list. And when you're reading that first part and you're waiting to see, is this going to be it or not, and then that one just grabs you, you just feel that thrill and that excitement. But there's a couple other reasons. And yes, this is a short advertising for you too should become a slush pile reader, all you fans. If you're an aspiring writer, there is no better way to improve your craft than to read Slush and then go, okay, why am I quitting on this story after page 3? Oh, I didn't connect with the protagonist. Note to self, make sure my stories connect to the protagonist in the first 3 pages. And then, the other benefit is just working with great people like Ira and Stephen. It's a good experience to go through and see it from the other side. And it is so fun going to conventions with your little Amazing Stories pin and talking to people about the magazines. And when it first came back, just like Jeannie, the amount of, oh my gosh, Amazing Stories is back from the dead again. It was really just fun to go to conventions. And I'm going to say, because I am one of those people that feeds off people, if you're one of the participant audience members and you are comfortable turning your camera back on so we can see your faces, I wouldn't mind that a bit. It's a bit lonely looking at a bunch of names. Hi, Kit. All right. And that's my why I decided to read Slush.
Yeah, and that's great. And we're seeing everybody's faces. That's good. I agree with that. We love to see you. Just ooh, Mary, I love your library. So
is MJ Morris here? Was MJ Morris supposed to be on this panel?
No, it was just us 3.
Okay.
Yeah, I think she's on the How to Escape the Slush Pile, which we're doing later. Yeah. I actually have a really cool story about kind of exactly what you're saying, Rebecca, about learning by being someone who reads submissions. So when I was younger, I actually did a summer business program and started a publishing company, and it was called Popsicle Publishing, and it's probably going to get resurrected in some form soon. But the point is, before this, I had crippling kind of fear of rejection. Like, I'd been through the Odyssey program and I knew what the business was, but like a lot of young women, I think, I was just terrified of rejection, and I did not understand the whole system. And when I started reading submissions for the anthologies for Popsicle, all of a sudden, not only did I learn what people want to see in submissions, but I also learned, hey, that editor you're sending the story to, even if they don't accept it, is probably rooting for you. Because I was rooting for every single person that sent me a story, and I was happy they sent me something. And yeah, it was just a huge learning experience. And I agree. The people you get to hang out with when you do Slush reading and editing, and when you work with publications like this, it's amazing. I never want to stop talking to people about books and stories, and this is what I get to do. So, yay. So moving on, talking about the actual submissions, do we want to get into what we like to see in submissions and what really grabs us? I mean, that might be helpful for our audience.
I'm sure that's partly why some of the audience is here. So I think after we go through what we like, I would like to actually share each of our different processes, because I'm sure our process is different. But to get to the nitty gritty, I don't know what frustrates me more when I go to these kind of panels and they say, a really good story. Well, it's like, of course, that's, but I think what the reader needs to understand is we get lots of good stories. We get lots of B+, 92% their stories, and we can really only select the A+, and that's very subjective, and it is more there are some that you just start to read and the person does not have a command of language. They don't have a command of short stories. So that maybe is a small portion of them. And the biggest portion I find are those B plus stories. And those just, they have a character, they have a plot, they have a setting, but there is nothing.
Okay, something's going on here.
What's that?
Sorry.
Somebody needs to.
There we go. Okay, so we muted the music. Sorry, whoever that is. What is going on here? That's really weird. Okay.
Somebody hasn't got their mic.
There we are. Okay.
Okay. So the first thing that happens with me is that beginning gonna make the reader want to keep reading? And if there's nothing that connects to the protagonist, and if the story itself is not introduced somewhere fairly soon, this is short fiction, this is a lot different than a novel length, then, you know, if I'm not going to keep reading, then probably our readers wouldn't either. But then after that, it's on top of just a good base character plot setting built story, I want something that is unique. And I want something that fits with the Amazing Story brand. And so hopefully you can tell if the person who's submitting has read some of Amazing Stories. Because we do have a flavor, I'll call it. And, you know, I say it's, I think I've heard even Ira use the tagline, we are golden age with new day sensibilities. And we want that sense of wonder. And if it starts off with a violent rape murder scene type of shock value, that's not what I'm talking about with a hook. And I really, that just turns me off pretty quickly. And that's basically, you know, that's what I'm looking for to start with. And I'll turn it over to the next person.
Jeannie, let's go with you.
Okay, so when I get something, I'm a skimmer, so I skim through the whole story first. To sort of see if anything sort of catches me. Like, I like a good story. I know that sounds like I don't like any, I think because I also write, so then when you're editing, you're sort of trying to see, okay, did he do anything or he or she think of anything that I didn't think of, right? So I like things that are unique, as Rebecca pointed out, and sort of captivates me. So I go through the whole thing, and then I go back to the beginning, like, you know, does the character speak to me? Like, can I relate to the character? Should the audience or reader care about the character? Is there anything, was there a change in the person? Was there any conflict in the story? Is there anything that drives the pacing of the story? So then I sort of get into the more, I guess, the techniques, right? But at the end of the day, like, I need a good story. And if it bores me, I just can't finish it. It's like after a few pages and you're like, oh my God, there's nothing happening. They're just sitting on a chair or then thinking or whatever, right? Like, also I like sort of a description, not too much description, because if you have too much, you give away too much. If a little bit, sort of get a sense of where they are, the setting and whatnot. If it's interesting enough, then I'll move on. But that's my first pass, right? Like, if it passes those things, then, you know, then you sort of look deeper into it, right? Like, I think a lot of things like spelling mistakes, I'm quite lenient on in a way. Like, I mean, I'm like, okay, fine, you guys should have used spell check, but I'm sort of understand what you're trying to say. But if it's something that's a really good story, I'm willing to work with the writer. I think one time I got a story, it wasn't for Amazing Stories, it was for Dark Healing. I think we worked on it for like 8 months, but because we're an indie press, we have time. Like, we're not driven too much by money, right? Like, so it's a very different process, working with a smaller publisher than with a bigger publisher where there's deadlines and stuff. So how do you work, Elizabeth?
Well, you know, I want to echo a lot of what you said about the why do I care? Because, oh, Richard, your cat is adorable. Yeah, the why do I care is very, very important. If I reach probably page 2 or 3 and I don't know why I should care about this character and nothing has hooked me emotionally, there's a very high risk of me stopping reading unless the voice is very strong or the prose is very beautiful. I would say a story can start out with a description of a setting, but it needs to be musical and kind of beautiful and draw me in with its imagery. Um, I know not everybody likes Tolkien, but I do. So if somebody can set a scene the way he does, or maybe the way Stephen King does in the Final Dark Tower books, where you can just see it, I'm there. I'm there. But for the most part, what I usually pay attention to the most, and what usually distinguishes for me a B+ story from an A story, is pacing. And I'm going to get into this in the How to Get Out of the Slush, but I'm very sensitive to pacing, and if I'm seeing flabby scenes or scenes that ultimately don't seem to need to be there, or aren't pulling enough weight in enough categories and aren't doing double and triple duty, that's when I know that, this person is very talented, but they need to tighten it up. And, it needs more revisions before it's going to be at that level where I'm going to be passing it along. And as for, I guess I'll start with kind of my method, because we were going to go around and do that as well. I mean, I definitely, I think most of us are probably going to know at a certain point when the story, I think it's an interesting thing to discuss, that we know at a certain point when the story isn't going to work, and at that point we're going to stop reading. I personally do not read to the end of every single story. I probably read to the end of about 20 to 30% of the stories that are on my plate any given week. And now on a good week when I get, there are some weeks where I get all these stories and I'm like, how do I choose? I've got a quoting here, There are some beautiful weeks like that, and in those weeks I spend hours and I read every single story. But on an average week, 20 to 30%. And what I'll tend to do is, I think I like uniqueness, and I think ultimately the ones that I'm going to pass forward are the ones that I feel are really unique and interesting. And personally, this is just my own flavor of editing, I really like cheeky stuff. So if I think something is very cheeky and kind of maybe a little sarcastic and just really, it's doing something that's bending your mind or making you go, whoa, like that's the one that I'm going to pick, because, I just kind of bring a punk rock sensibility to everything that I do. So if it's cheeky, I'm there. Rebecca?
Well, I'm curious if my method is a little bit different than most slush pile readers. For one, I cannot skim. I'm physically incapable of skimming a manuscript, which is a horrible handicap to have as a slush pile reader. The other problem I have is because I'm a freelance editor and I'm a writer, I'm on my frickin' computer so much. The last thing I want to do is read a story on a screen. It's uncomfortable for my eyes. It hurts. So I'll give you 3 pages. I will actually read the first 3 pages of every single submission that comes my way, and then decide if it's good enough to kill a tree. And then I will print the first 10 pages, and that I will sit down with my stack of all the stories that made that first cut. And I have to be in a totally different place than where I work, and a totally different vibe than when I'm writing or editing. I don't let a pen anywhere near the paper, because then I go into editing mode, which we're not the editors, we're the gatekeepers. And so if it makes that first 10 pages, that means that already, if it did have a lot of setting, that setting either moved the plot or revealed character. It introduced a protagonist I'm curious about. It gave me some kind of a story actually starting that I'm interested to find out what's going to happen. So when I sit down with those 10 pages, it's almost like pleasure reading. It's so close. And when I get done with one of them that is just the 10 pages, and assuming the story's not done by 10 pages, quick hint, if your story is 10 pages or less, that means you're getting me to read the entire story probably. Then if I go to put it down and pick up the next one and I go, oh crap, no, I've got to go find out how this ends. And I go running to my computer and print off the rest. I've got a pretty good idea that that story is going to make it. And you know, if I can articulate what's at stake, so that's why I care and who I care about, then I'm more likely to print off the rest of the pages. There have been a few times when I've gotten that excited and printed off the last few pages and the ending just sucked. But not very often. But that's a risk I take. And so that's kind of how my, you know, oh, the one thing I do also, I think, is whether or not the story stays with me for a little while. If after I've read the whole story, I don't have to go run back and hit accept and, you know, be all excited to send this on to Ira because I'm sure this is just the story. I give myself to the next morning. And if that story is still resonating in my head, if I'm still thinking about that character, that what happened, then most likely when I get up in the morning, I'm going to go ahead and forward it to Ira. But if in the morning it's completely left, then it wasn't an amazing story. Yeah, pun intended. That's my process.
So I want to bounce off something you said, Rebecca, but also something that Jeannie said earlier. I think actually I would be really worried about skimming. I want to disagree with you a little bit. I don't ever skim either. I'm a very slow reader, actually, compared to other lit majors. I'm a very slow reader, but I remember everything I read. Like, I'm the kind of person that can read a poem twice and then quote you a stanza in an exam later, you know? And so I get very close with the text, and I actually, you know, I feel like if I don't read it very carefully, I'm not simulating the reader's experience. And that's very important. I want to know what our readers are going to be experiencing word for word, you know, every punctuation mark, every sentence. I want that whole experience, because if I can't read it straight through, where's the guarantee that our readers can read it straight through? You know,
well, sorry.
Jeannie, you were saying, like, you're not a stickler about spelling and grammar. I am. I'm a copy editor really at heart, and
yeah.
Ooh, if stuff is out of place with the spelling and grammar, then you know, like, that's part of the little things that I look at to make sure that it's at the level for the magazine.
Yeah, I think for me it's a matter of time. There's too much volume that I have to read. I mean, other than Amazing Stories, I'm just involved in too many things. So I to survive, if I skim and it makes the first cut and I remember, okay, this is something that caught me, then I'll go back and look at it again a bit more carefully in order to make my notes. But if it doesn't survive the first round, I'm like, you know what, this isn't going to make it. The story isn't resonating with me. So yeah, I have to let it go. Like, I just have too many things to look at. And then, yeah, the second and third round will be slower. But yeah, initially it has to survive the my first experience. So.
Well, yeah, and I mean, that makes sense to have like a layering approach to it too. Like, that's actually super efficient, and I like that a lot. You know, that's pretty neat.
Well, and the writer might be liking the idea that at least even if you're skimming, you're getting to the end. If I'm only giving them the first 3 pages and they've got a heck of a good ending, you know, if they've shot themselves in the foot, where if you do the skim through and you go, oh, wow, then maybe you will give them a little more try. I want to talk about ones that don't even get out of the gate. Do you guys have about 1 in 10 that are still guideline failures?
Yeah, there's a lot of guideline failures. I'm shocked at how many people don't pay attention to the guidelines before they submit something. Maybe it's just how I was taught, because before I seriously started submitting anything, I went to Odyssey and they drilled it into us, you know, submission guidelines, But yeah, I don't know. I wonder why that is. But yeah, I get a lot of those too. Jeannie, do you?
I'm a little bit more forgiving. If they survive my skim, I'll be like fine. But yeah, some people just don't read the submission guidelines. They just sort of submit, or sometimes or like they submit without telling you what it's for. Like I mean I'm like sometimes it comes to my email box or whatever, and you're like okay, and it doesn't say where there's like what publication they want to submit for or whatnot. They're just like, this is my story, and then they just sort of throw it at you. You're like, all right, that's cool.
Yeah,
But,
when I ran Pop Seagull, I used to get those people just submitting for no anthology in particular. Just, hi, here's my story.
Yeah, but I mean, the guidelines are there for a reason, right? Like, it's sort of to make it easier for us to go through because there's so many. And for us to find information, like even if we do want your story, right? Like, where's your contact information, etc., right? So we can pass you on. So there's a reason for why there's submission guidelines.
Well, and I think there's something that authors don't think about when they're just so used to sending off manuscripts. And yes, there is a standard manuscript format. And yes, double-spaced, 12 font is really nice. But Amazing Stories makes the slush pile anonymous for a reason. There's just study after study that shows that if somebody's got an odd name, or when females just didn't get published in sci-fi, so they had to use their initials, or slush pile readers can be an in for their friends, that it's just not all submissions are treated equal. So I really like that the submissions come to me anonymously, because if at a convention somebody comes up and says, oh yeah, I submitted to Amazing Stories, but I got rejected. And I say, you know what? I have no way to know if it was your story. We don't see your name. I don't know about you guys. I don't read the cover letters.
No.
We're we know nothing but the words that are there on page 1, so that everybody gets an equal shot. Now, the problem is when we're talking up Amazing Stories and we, talk to somebody who is an icon in the industry, and invite them to submit, sometimes they don't realize to send directly to somebody, and they're caught in the slush, and we get a little, an issue there. But normally it is wonderful to have everybody have an equal shot, and we don't know your name, we don't know your credits, all we know is what we see on the page. And that's why I automatically hit guideline failure if you forget to remove your name from your manuscript. If I open that up and your name is there at the top, and I've seen a friend's name, or a lot of times they'll remember to remove it from the header, but then they'll have their title and by, and then they'll have their name. So make sure you remove it both places, folks. And that's my soapbox.
Absolutely, though. That's why it's so important specifically for Amazing Stories, because we're trying to give an equal opportunity to everyone who submits. And when someone puts their personally identifying information in there, we can't do that, and we don't want to be biased at all. So we're about at the halfway point. I was wondering if we might want to open up to questions now and see if anyone in the chat has any questions for us.
Don't be shy.
Oh, will guideline failure be communicated to the writer in the rejection? Yes, it is. We actually have an automatic system that we can use that will send you, I believe, an email that will let you know what happens. And Kit asks, how do you approach a magazine to become a slush pile reader? And maybe that's a great question. Why don't we all talk about our origin stories with Amazing Stories, and then maybe that'll help.
So my first experience with Slush was as editor-in-chief of a college literary magazine. And I realized right off that as the editor-in-chief, I would reject any of my own stories. So I realized what a great training tool this was. And so when I gave up writing for a little while and then came back, Kelly Green happened to be at she's looking at me, happened to be at a local small con. that I was attending, and she looked just downtrodden. She's always a real perky, happy person. And so I was talking to her, and she was working as I think, an assistant editor for an online science fiction magazine. And she's all, I can't keep up with my slush. I can't keep up with all these and in case we haven't clarified, slush is unsolicited submissions to a magazine. Hopefully most people know when we say we're slush pile readers, that's what it is. Now I guess the new term is first readers. And I said, well, really, Kelly, could you use some help? And she said, really? But then I put a limit on what I knew I could feasibly do. I said, I can handle 10 stories a week. And that helped her out. It helped me in my writing. It got me going again. So when I was at Worldcon and I saw Ira out there giving away free samples of the magazine, and, you know, my grandpa and my mom were, you know, they had stacks of the Amazing Stories collections. So I was like a fangirl. I took a deep breath, tried to put on my hat professionally, walked up to him and said, you know, I have read Slush before for other science fiction magazines. Are you guys, you know, bringing people on for that? And he's like, email me. Here's my card. And the biggest thing was I followed up, and pretty close after reminded him who I was and that I was willing to do Slush. And then when I got my first slush pile, I made sure to get through it fairly quickly so he knew I was serious, because I think they get a lot of people who think it would be really fun and want that cachet to say that they work for a magazine, and then they let that slush sit there for weeks. And we try not to let people's submissions sit for too long. So that was the steps I took.
Yeah, that's one of the things I really love about Amazing Stories is that we really, really do care about not letting your submissions sit there forever. And, you know, having, you know, submitted a lot of things myself and then not seen any action for a year or more, I think that's so great. As for myself, I started on Brock University's literary magazine, Rebecca, very similar to Rebecca. It's called The Harp Weaver, and I was a slush reader for that. One of the professors was the senior editor. And then I started doing slush for my own publishing company. And then shortly after I had put Popsicle Publishing on hiatus, Ira approached me about reading slush for the magazine. And I agree, it's something that takes consistent effort. I think there are a lot of people that want to do it, and I think that you have to make sure that there is consistent effort being put forth every week. This is something I do every single week. I just set a day aside, I sit down, and I do it, you know. And I do about 10 to 12 stories a week, but I actually allow that to be scaled up with volume. So if there's a big backlog of submissions, you know, I might take 2 packets a week. I might take more. You know, I'm flexible because I want to work here. So, Jeannie.
Well, let's see. I mean, I did a lot of slush when I opened Dark Helix Press. I had opened it up because I was interested in publishing more diverse stories. I didn't think there was enough diversity in the publishing world, so that was sort of the main mandate of the indie press. And then people started sending stuff in, and Ara and I met on one of my anthologies called Trump, Utopia or Dystopia. So he sent in a very funny story, inspired by Mr. Trump, and that's how we met. And I think that book alone, I mean, we had over 100 submissions, and then I did another one about Canada, and I think I got 12. So anyhow, so that was kind of interesting. So I met Ira there, and we became friends. And later on, he was telling me about starting Amazing Stories and whatnot. He needed some help, and then I said, okay, what do you need help with? And then that's when he was asking if I was interested in the slush project. I said, anything, you know, you need, right? So that's how I got involved. But I'm very impressed with how it turned out. Like there's a whole like computer system and software and everything. Like, you know what I mean? Like I didn't expect that. Like, you know, like
Very
a lot of the
organized.
stuff I get from Rice Paper Magazine is still Word docs, right? Like we don't use Submittable or anything like that, right? They just send Word docs, and then I'm like, all right, I'll go through this pile, right? So, but I think it's been very organized. It's nice there's a system, and instead of having to make your own manual Excel sheet. I mean, the work is the work. I mean, it's the same, you know, going through the pile, but it's been quite organized, and I'm just impressed. And Amazing Story is going to have another Kickstarter soon, and so I'll be helping out with that. So, you know, lots of stuff going on, right? And I think Kit's general question is, how do you approach a magazine to become a slush pile reader? It's just write to the editor. Really is. Depends on the magazine. I'm sure a lot of magazines need help, and there's another question here about how does pay work. I mean, initially I volunteered. I didn't ask about money, so I did it for free. But at times when the magazine has a profit, they will ask us, you know, do you guys want something? And then, you know, you have an option to say yes or no, right? So, and it's a small magazine, right? So I have low expectations, right? Like you're not going to become a millionaire reading slush piles.
So I do want to address the legalities. So yes, a lot of Kelly's putting her mouth and trying not to laugh. A lot of magazines use volunteer slush pile readers. Because of the contract work laws now, some of them are much more comfortable if you're willing to be an intern through college, because that way there is not an issue of whether you are doing the substantive work of the magazine. However, if you come on as a volunteer, it is kind of a foot in the door stepping towards trying to get into the industry in the next way in. I mean, it is a great way to get your foot in the door. But
especially
no,
if you didn't
it
go to
doesn't pay a
university
whole
for
lot.
publishing, yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Sorry.
No, it doesn't pay a lot. And I think we can really quickly answer for Amazing Stories. Kelly asked, how many stories do we get to read? And it is normally about a dozen stories a week, I think, that we get in our own queue. But I thought it was wonderful when we ended up with a huge backlog and we had a delay in the next production, that Ira froze the submission so that we caught up and had a time, and now that it's reopened, we could keep up. And so we try not to let them set for too long. And I don't know how many slush pile readers we have, but I'm assuming it's fairly equal distributed, about a dozen or more, right around in there a week.
So I see that Lloyd has actually contributed some of his experiences to the chat, so I'd just like to read those out for everybody. So he says, I'd heard through the grapevine that Amazing was being restarted, and I found out that Ira was the editor-in-chief. We're both in Toronto, so I contacted him and asked him if he might need a proofread or copy editor, and I sent him my working resume. He said sure, and sent me his working version of the second issue, and I've been doing that for Amazing ever since. So that's really great. And he also says below, I asked Ira for $1 for all that I do for Amazing. That way I can legally say that it is paid work, and I can put this on my resume. Smart. Very smart, Lloyd. And Kit also asked, do you need to be a traditionally published writer to become a first reader? Well, Kit, you know my history, and I'm traditionally published now, but I wasn't before, so I don't think you do. I think you just have to have a good sense for the work.
Well, and one thing that helps is if the magazine you approach, you have been reading for a really long time, because every magazine does have its own flavor. And so just because I'm comfortable being a slush pile reader for Amazing Stories does not mean that I would be a comfortable slush pile reader for a high fantasy magazine. If I don't read it ravenously, and if it is not a magazine that I dearly love, then I'm not going to slush pile read it.
Yeah, it depends on what you're comfortable reading. I mean, I've done slush pile in the past for scientific journals, and that's like a totally different ball game, right? So maybe find a magazine, like if you really want to be a slush pile reader, find something that you really, really like, because you're going to be spending a lot of time on this, right? So you might as well find something you enjoy to do, right?
So it looks like we're in our last 10 minutes. So, I mean, do we have any closing statements or anything we'd really like everybody at the panel to know about being a Slush reader, and ultimately what our final advice is for anybody submitting to the magazine? Or maybe advice for aspiring Slush readers?
Okay, so first of all, I want to thank everybody for coming, East Coast time or not, and showing your lovely faces, Mary, Richard, Amber, Kelly, Kit. It is so nice just that you guys went through. I don't know how many of you had never used Zoom before, but we've got a whole lot of people that this is their first experience. Second, if you would be patient with me, because on one of my other panels, I'm going to be relying on share screen a lot, so I'm going to see if it was enabled so I know whether or not I can use it. Nope. Okay. So I will do a plug for, if you stay right in this room, if they'll let you. The next panel I am on is the How I Sabotaged My Pitch. So those of you who have novels or even stories, I mean, it happens at conventions, that you want to pitch. And then lastly, for convention attendees only, as a freelance editor, I will do free 15 sample pages of editing. Hint, that's pretty close to a full short story. So I'm going to put to everybody my email address. This is for your use only, please. And the offer of 15 pages is for convention attendees only. And it will show up in your chat in just a second. And that's my plug.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think I just want to tell everybody about my panels. So later today at 2 p.m., I'm going to be doing How to Get Out of the Slush. I think Jeannie's going to be on that too, so that should be really good. And oh, Heather Courtney says that this has been a great session. Thank you. Well, thank you all for attending. This has been wonderful. But also, I'm going to be doing a reading, 11 a.m. on Sunday. I'm going to be reading my humorous horror story, It's All in the Sauce, which is from the Quiet Afternoon anthology. Quiet Afternoon is actually a really neat anthology, especially in the political and social climate we're in right now, because it's all really lovely, low-stakes stories that are sort of like reading a Miyazaki movie. And, you know, and some of them are funny, and some of them are sweet, and you know, they're just, it's a really nice, relaxing read, and I think it's going to be a really great anthology coming out. So that's July 1st that that's dropping. And final advice about being a first reader, I think just read all you can, always strive to be better, always strive for professional development, and to be kind of dissecting the ways that fiction works and why it works. And I think you're well on your way. Jeannie?
Would you repeat when your reading is?
11 a.m. on Saturday.
I think we're reading at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah, you're right. 11 o'clock Saturday.
Okay, good. I'm glad I'm right.
You gotta pick between the two of us. No. Well, thank you very much for attending. I know it's lunchtime, and you guys gave up your lunch hour for this. But for those that want to be Slush Pile reader, just ask. I mean, it's, you know, there's a lot of there's a lot of need for this. So find something that you love and you want to learn more about. And I think it'll also make you a better writer if you're a writer, because then you sort of see in a way the competition, right? Like if you're submitting, you can sort of see what other people are submitting, right? So you sort of understand in a way what you need to do to make yourself a better writer, and I think it'll improve your writing. And yes, Elizabeth and I are on another panel today at 2 o'clock, how to get out of the slush pile. So this is for writers that want to learn more advice about how to get out of the slush piles. Although we did talk about some of it today, but we'll talk a bit more in depth about the writing. And I also have a reading 11 o'clock tomorrow on Saturday, and I'm reading a science fiction story about genetically modified children. So that's my thing tomorrow. And thank you very much for attending once again. So.
Now we do have 5 more minutes. Is there any last questions from the audience? Just like, you know, I want to give people a chance. No? Okay, well, everybody, let's get to our next panel. Thank you all for coming, and have a great afternoon. I'll see you around.
Oh, wait. There's one question.
Oh, hold on. Yes.
Do you agree on stories, different slushers? No, not necessarily. Not necessarily.
Well, that's kind of interesting because we don't, like the way Amazing Stories works, we don't necessarily see each other's submissions that we send up to AEWRS. But in other situations, like when I was on the Harp Weaver, the way we did it was everybody would put a check mark on manuscripts they liked. And then at the end of the semester, when we were deciding what to publish, we would all sit around and hash it out as a committee. And boy, was that interesting. Because sometimes you end up advocating for stories that you were kind of medium on because everyone else likes them and that's how we're going to get consensus. And sometimes, you know, in that situation, something that was really amazing but kind of niche slips through the cracks. I actually prefer Amazing Stories way because when you're picking things by committee in that way, you know, sometimes things that just gain consensus are what goes forward rather than what's really innovative. Rebecca, you look like you have something to say.
Oh, just when I was doing the literary magazine, we had a similar process as that, and those meetings were such a time suck, and people did not agree on much, but we did have a rubric that did disqualify stories that just didn't meet basic standards, so we didn't waste time talking about stories that didn't rate a plot, a setting, a character, language style. But yeah, with Amazing Stories, we send it up and then AEWRS decides, and that's nice.
Yeah, it is. It's very good. Richard Graham Cameron says he's also going to be on the How to Get Out of the Slush pile. So yes, come out and see all of us. It's going to be really good. Aw, that's nice. We're getting lots of thank yous. I think that's lovely. So we only got 2 more minutes left. So I think at this point, I just want to thank everybody again and look forward to seeing you all in the rest of the weekend, and have a great afternoon. All right. How do we end this?